I overheard my mother whisper, "It was just a slip-up with Trevor. Audrey doesn't need to know." At my sister's baby shower, I gave her a special gift box, photos of her affair with my husband. As I unveiled the evidence gallery on the wall, my mother's text message was displayed, "Audrey is strong. She'll be fine." Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Audrey, and what I'm about to share is the story of how my life, my marriage, and my family were systematically dismantled by the very people I trusted most. It's a story about betrayal, but more importantly, it's about what comes after. To really understand how everything fell apart, you first have to understand the foundation it was built on, a foundation of cracks that I'd spent my whole life trying to ignore. My family. It's strange, isn't it? You can love your family with all your heart and, in the same breath, know that they are the source of your deepest wounds. I always knew I wasn't the favorite child. No one ever used those words, of course. My parents weren't cruel people, not in the overt, shouting way you see on TV. Theirs was a quieter kind of cruelty, one of casual dismissal and unconscious preference. It's something you feel in your bones. It's the way their eyes light up when one child walks into the room, while your entrance barely gets a nod. It's the way stories at the dinner table always circle back to one person's achievements, while yours are treated like footnotes. My older sister, Blair, was the sun my family orbited around. She was born shining. Beautiful, effortlessly popular, and blessed with a magnetic confidence that made people want to be near her. My parents were her biggest fans. They cataloged her successes like precious gems. When Blair got an honor report card in 5th grade, my father framed it. It hung on the wall of his office for years. That same semester, I got straight A's. My mother glanced at my report card, gave me a brief, distracted smile and said, "That's wonderful, honey. Now, can you set the table for dinner?" It was 1,000 tiny cuts like that, every single day. I remember my 10th birthday. I had been begging for a specific telescope I'd seen in a catalog. I was obsessed with astronomy, and I dreamed of mapping the stars from my bedroom window. Blair, whose birthday was a month later, wanted an expensive porcelain doll. On my birthday, I unwrapped my big present from them, my heart pounding with excitement. It was a beige, sensible sweater. "You'll get so much more use out of this, Audrey," my mother said kindly. That telescope was just a toy. A month later, Blair got her doll. When we were teenagers, it only got worse. I had saved up for weeks to buy a beautiful blue silk dress for a school dance. I loved that dress. It was the first thing I'd ever owned that made me feel pretty. The night before the dance, I discovered Blair had taken it from my closet without asking. She'd worn it to a party and spilled something down the front, leaving a dark, greasy stain. When I confronted her, crying, she just shrugged. "It's just a stupid dress." But the worst part was when I told our parents. My father sighed, looking at me with weary disappointment. "Well, Audrey, you shouldn't have left it out where it could get damaged. You know how your sister is. It was my fault. It was always, somehow, my fault. You might think I'd grow to hate her, but I didn't. That's the most confusing part. I loved my sister. I looked up to her, even as I resented the golden glow that followed her everywhere. I told myself it wasn't her fault. It was just the way things were. I clung to the hope that adulthood would be the great equalizer. That once we were out of that house and living our own lives, we would finally meet in the middle, as sisters, as equals. And for a while, it felt like I was right. I moved out, got my accounting degree, and built a life for myself. It was a quiet life, but it was mine. And then I met Trevor. Trevor was like a breath of fresh air. He saw me. Not Blair's younger sister, not the quiet, overlooked daughter. Just me, Audrey. He knew all about my family dynamic. He'd be the one to hold my hand after a tense phone call with my mother, to listen patiently as I cried in frustration. "They don't see how incredible you are," he'd tell me, his voice firm and reassuring. "But I do. I see you." For 5 years, he was my sanctuary, my partner, the one person on earth I believed would always be in my corner. He was the foundation of my new world, a world where I was finally the main character. I trusted him. I trusted him completely. The night it all came crashing down started, as most tragedies do, with a celebration. My parents had called a mandatory family dinner to celebrate Blair's pregnancy. She and her husband, Graham, had been trying for a couple of years, and this was big news. I was genuinely happy for her. I'd always wanted to be an aunt. The car ride over to their house was quiet. Trevor was humming along to the radio, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. "You ready for this?" he asked, glancing over at me. "As I'll ever be," I said, trying for a light-hearted tone. But the familiar knot was already tightening in my stomach. It was the Blair show anxiety, the feeling of bracing myself for an evening of being invisible. "Hey," he said, reaching over and squeezing my hand. "We'll be a team. You and me." I squeezed back, grateful for the gesture. The house was already buzzing when we arrived. My mother flung the door open before we could even knock, her face flushed with excitement. "You're here," she exclaimed, pulling us into hugs. My father was in the living room, pouring champagne, something usually reserved for major holidays. The entire atmosphere was electric with my parents' joy. Dinner was an elaborate affair, my mother's best recipes laid out on the good china. And the conversation, from the moment we sat down, was exclusively about Blair. "Oh, Blair, you're just glowing," my mother said for the third time. "I was telling Carol next door, pregnancy just makes some women more beautiful, and you're one of them." "We've already started clearing out the spare room for a nursery here," my father announced proudly. "Only the best for my grandbaby." They talked about potential names, about the merits of different strollers, about how Blair was so brave for enduring morning sickness. Graham, Blair's husband, looked proud and happy. Trevor played his part, raising his glass for toasts and asking all the right questions. I just sat there, smiling and nodding, feeling like I was watching a movie about a family, not actually participating in my own. At one point, Trevor kicked my foot gently under the table, a secret signal we'd developed. It meant, "I see you. I know this is hard." Or so I thought. After the main course, the fawning became too much. The air in the room felt thick and cloying, and I needed to escape. "That was delicious, Mom," I said, standing up. "I'm just going to use the restroom." The hallway was cool and quiet. I leaned against the wall for a moment, just breathing. On the wall hung a gallery of family photos. Blair at her high school graduation. Blair on a family vacation. Blair and me as kids, her arm slung around my shoulder, a bright, confident smile on her face while I looked shyly at the camera. A ghost of a memory, of a simpler time. I continued to the bathroom, washed my hands, and stared at my reflection, giving myself a silent pep talk. Just one more hour. You can do this. On my way back, as I passed the kitchen, I heard my parents' voices, low and hushed. I stopped. I shouldn't have. I should have kept walking, gone back to the table, and endured the rest of the night. But some instinct, some deep, primal alarm bell, made me pause. I leaned closer to the slightly ajar door, holding my breath. And in that moment, the entire world, everything I thought was true and real, was set on fire. "We can never let her find out," my mother's voice was a sharp, urgent hiss, like a leaking gas pipe. It would destroy her. And it would ruin everything for Blair. My father let out a long, weary sigh. I know. It was a mistake. A stupid, one-time mistake. They got carried away. A mistake? What mistake? My mind scrambled, trying to piece it together. Was it about money? Was Graham in some kind of trouble? My thoughts were a frantic jumble, searching for a logical explanation. The explanation that came next was anything but logical. It was a reality-shattering bomb. "It's not fair that one little slip-up with Trevor should tarnish this for her," my mother said, her voice laced with a defiant justification. "She was lonely, he was there. It happened. The important thing is she's pregnant now, and we have to protect her and this baby. Audrey doesn't need to know. It would only cause unnecessary drama." Trevor. With Trevor. The name echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I physically grabbed the wall to keep from falling. I couldn't get any air into my lungs. My vision tunneled, the edges turning dark. The floral pattern on the hallway wallpaper began to warp and swim, the roses looking like leering, mocking faces. It was a physical sensation, a wave of cold that started in my stomach and spread through my entire body, leaving me frozen, encased in ice. My husband. My rock. My safe harbor. My Trevor. And my sister. My beautiful, golden sister. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a conspiracy. My own parents, the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were a part of it. They knew. And they weren't just hiding it, they were dismissing it. One little slip-up. Unnecessary drama. My entire life, my marriage, my heart, it was all just unnecessary drama in the grand production of Blair's perfect life. Every single moment of feeling less than, of feeling invisible, came rushing back, not as a vague insecurity, but as a confirmed fact. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being overly sensitive. I was, and always had been, disposable. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in that hallway. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. The next thing I knew, I was moving, my limbs stiff and clumsy, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I stumbled back towards the living room, my face a blank mask. I'm sure I looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I had. The ghost of the life I thought I had. "Audrey? Are you okay? You're pale," my mother asked, her face a picture of concern. It was a lie. Her concern was a lie. Everything was a lie. I have a migraine, I managed to choke out, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. It just hit me. I need to go home. Trevor stood up, his own face a mask of husbandly worry. "Of course, honey. Let's get you home." The hypocrisy of his touch as he put a hand on my back was so vile it almost made me sick right there. I pulled away. "I can drive myself," I said, my voice flat. I fumbled for my purse, my keys. I didn't look at any of them. I couldn't. If I looked at Blair's face, at Trevor's, at my parents', I would have shattered into a million pieces. I walked out the front door and into the cool night air. I got into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I drove away from that house, from that life, tears blurring the streetlights into long, watery streaks. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I was driving away from the ruins. The next 48 hours were lived in a state of suspended animation. I was a ghost in my own life. I called my boss and left a vague voicemail about a stomach bug. The lie came easily. I was discovering I was a much better liar than I thought. The house felt cavernous and hostile. Every object was a monument to my broken life. I tried to do normal things, to anchor myself in reality. I went to the grocery store, wandering the aisles under the harsh fluorescent lights. I filled my cart with things, milk, bread, vegetables, but by the time I got to the checkout, my mind was so blank I couldn't remember why I needed any of it. I just abandoned the cart in the middle of an aisle and walked out. At home, I tried to work. I opened my laptop, stared at a client's spreadsheet, but the numbers and columns just swam together in a meaningless jumble. It was like trying to read a foreign language. I closed the laptop and crawled back to the couch, pulling a blanket over my head as if I could hide from my own thoughts. Trevor tried to breach the wall of silence I had built around myself. He'd come home from work and find me staring at a blank TV screen. "Hey, honey. Feeling any better?" he'd ask, his voice cautious. Tired, I'd mumble. "Did you eat anything? I can order a pizza." "Not hungry." Our conversations were a series of dead ends. He was growing frustrated, I could tell. "Audrey, you have to talk to me," he said on the second night, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "What is going on with you? If you're mad about something, just tell me." The audacity of it, to stand there and demand I explain my sadness, as if he had no idea of the bomb he had detonated in my life. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to claw at his face until his fake concern was stripped away. But I couldn't. The words were trapped behind a wall of ice in my chest. So I just shook my head and turned back to the blank TV. I was drowning. Drowning in the silence, in the betrayal. I thought the pain would consume me, that I would simply fade away into this gray, numb fog forever. And then, on the third morning, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a picture of my mother. My first instinct was to throw the phone against the wall. But instead, I watched it buzz, and as it did, the fog began to thin. The numbness receded, and underneath it was something else. Something hard and cold. It was rage. A pure, clean, clarifying rage. It didn't make the pain go away, but it gave it a shape. It gave it a purpose. I let the call go to voicemail. A few minutes later, she called again. This time, I answered. The spark had been lit. Now, all it needed was fuel. My mother was about to provide a tanker truck's worth. "Audrey, darling. I'm so glad I reached you. How are you feeling? Your father and I have been so worried sick since you rushed off the other night." Her voice was a symphony of practiced maternal concern, so flawless in its delivery that a younger, more naive version of me would have believed it instantly. But I wasn't that person anymore. I could hear the falseness under every honeyed word. I took a slow, deliberate breath before answering, keeping my voice even. "I'm much better now, Mom. Thanks for checking in. It was just a terrible headache, but it's passed." "Oh, thank goodness," she chirped, the relief in her voice palpable. The relief of not having to deal with any messy, inconvenient emotions. She quickly moved on to the idle chatter, asking about my work, telling me about a sale at her favorite department store. It was all a buffer, a gentle lead-up to the real reason for her call. I could feel it coming. "Listen, honey," she said, her tone shifting to one of business. "Your father and I were talking, and with the baby coming, there's just so much to do. Blair is feeling a bit overwhelmed, and you've always been so wonderful at organizing things." I stayed silent, letting her talk, letting her dig her own grave. "And well, we were thinking, since you have such a talent for it, that you would be the perfect person to plan Blair's baby shower." There it was. The request. So breathtaking in its audacity, so completely and utterly tone-deaf, that for a wild second, I thought it had to be a joke. A cruel, twisted joke. They wanted me, the woman whose life they had just detonated, to plan the party. To buy the decorations, order the cake, and send out invitations celebrating the fruit of my own husband's affair with my sister. It was a confirmation of my status in the family. I was not a daughter to be cherished, I was a utility to be used. The reliable one. The maid. A hot, white wave of fury washed over me, so intense it made my vision swim. I wanted to scream into the phone until my lungs burned. I wanted to tell her exactly what I'd heard, to unleash all the pain and rage I had swallowed down for the past 3 days. But as the wave of heat receded, something else took its place. An idea, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, formed in my mind. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a wild, chaotic fire. It had been forged into a weapon. They weren't just insulting me. They were handing me the perfect stage. The perfect audience. The perfect opportunity. A slow, cold smile touched my lips, a smile that was all mine, that my mother couldn't see. "Mom," I said, and I was shocked at how warm and sincere my voice sounded. "That's a wonderful idea. I would be honored to do it. Anything for Blair." My mother was ecstatic. "Oh, Audrey, really? That's just marvelous. You are such a good sister. Blair is going to be absolutely thrilled." "Of course," I said smoothly. "She deserves the best." "Oh, she'll get what she deserves, all right," I thought as I ended the call. "You all will." I stood up from the couch. The fog was gone. The paralysis was gone. I walked into the kitchen, my steps firm and sure. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but now it had a purpose. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a strategist. My mission was no longer just to survive. It was to get justice. The game was on, and I was about to write the rules. That night marked the beginning of my new, secret life. By day, I was Audrey, the diligent accountant and dutiful sister, making phone calls to caterers and designing baby shower invitations. But by night, I became a detective, and my own home was the crime scene. My investigation began with a singular, terrifying objective: I had to get into Trevor's laptop and phone. I waited until well after midnight, until his breathing had settled into the deep, rhythmic pattern of sleep. The man I once loved now represented nothing more than a locked box of secrets, and I needed the key. I crept into our home office, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. My hands were shaking as I sat down at his desk and powered on his laptop. Password protected. Of course. I took a deep breath and started trying the usual combinations. Our anniversary. My birthday. His birthday. His mother's birthday. Nothing. Each access denied message felt like a small, smug taunt. I spent nearly an hour the first night, getting nowhere, my frustration mounting until I had to force myself to stop, terrified of locking the account permanently. The next day, I was a wreck, but I kept up the facade, discussing frosting options with my mother over the phone while my mind raced with password possibilities. And then, she said something that triggered a memory. She was talking about their old dog, a golden retriever named Gus that Trevor had adored as a kid. That night, I tried again. I typed in Gus the dog one. Access granted. I felt a jolt of triumphant, nauseating victory. I was in. For the next several hours, I meticulously combed through his digital life. I was methodical, starting with the most obvious places. Emails. Social media messages. His browser history was a parade of the mundane: sports scores, news articles, Amazon purchases. They were clever. They hadn't left a trail of breadcrumbs. They had tried to sweep the path clean. But people like them always have one fatal flaw: arrogance. They believe they're smarter than everyone else. They get sentimental. They keep trophies. My search led me to his file directory. It was mostly work documents and organized folders of family photos from vacations. And then I saw it. A folder on his main drive, not hidden, but disguised. It was named Quarterly Reports. It was a plausible name, but it felt wrong. All of his actual work was stored on a secure company cloud. This was local. This was personal. My heart hammered against my ribs. My mouth went dry. With a trembling finger, I double-clicked the folder. It wasn't full of spreadsheets. It was full of more folders, each one labeled with the name of a month. June. July. August. I held my breath and clicked on June. It was full of pictures. The first photo was almost innocent. It was from our family's 4th of July barbecue. Trevor and Blair, standing by the grill, laughing at something off camera. But there was a look in his eyes, the way he was angled towards her, it was too familiar. It was the way he used to look at me. As I scrolled, the innocence evaporated. There was a photo of them on a park bench, his arm around her, her head nestled on his shoulder. It wasn't a brother-in-law's casual hug. It was possessive. Intimate. I felt a hot, sick feeling rise in my throat. I clicked on the July folder. The sickness turned into a physical blow. They were in a hotel room. The art on the wall was generic, the lighting dim. They were selfies, dozens of them. The two of them in a king-sized bed, tangled in the white hotel sheets, grinning at the camera. In one, Blair was wearing his button-down shirt and nothing else. In another, he was kissing her neck as she tilted her head back, her eyes closed in ecstasy. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up. This was a sustained, planned, and gleefully executed affair. The joy on their faces was the most painful part. This wasn't a story of regret or conflicted hearts. This was a story of two people getting exactly what they wanted, without a single thought for the person they were destroying. My hands were ice cold, but I kept going. I had to see it all. I opened every folder, examined every photo. Each one was another nail in the coffin of my marriage, but it was also another piece of ammunition. The next night, I took it a step further. I downloaded a data recovery program, a tool to find files they thought they had deleted. And that's when I found the text messages. Hundreds of them. Blair, still thinking about last night. You're amazing. Trevor, you too. This is getting risky though. Audrey, almost saw your name pop up on my phone. Blair, relax. She'd never suspect a thing. She trusts you too much. Her words were a cruel twist of the knife. She had used my love for him as a shield for their deception. But the final, damning piece of evidence, the one that implicated my entire family, was a series of screenshots. Blair had screenshotted conversations with our mother and sent them to Trevor, a little trophy to prove their conspiracy was safe. Mom, just be discreet, sweetheart. Your father and I just want you to be happy. He's a good man. Blair, I know. I feel guilty about Audrey sometimes. Mom, Audrey is strong. She'll be fine. What's important right now is you and protecting your image. A scandal is the last thing you need. No one needs to know. My own mother had not only condoned the affair, but had actively coached her on how to get away with it. She had assessed my strength and decided it could be used to absorb the pain they caused. I was not a daughter to be protected, I was a shock absorber for the family car. I worked through the night with a chilling, robotic efficiency. I copied every file. Every photo, every video, every message. I uploaded it all to a secure, encrypted cloud account. Then I transferred everything to 3 separate USB drives. I hid one in a hollowed-out book in my office, another taped to the underside of a drawer, and the third I kept in my purse at all times. The evidence was collected. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the party. The morning of the baby shower, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The anxiety and grief that had been my constant companions for weeks were gone, replaced by a singular, icy resolve. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was thinner, her eyes holding a new, hard light, but she was not broken. She was a soldier on the morning of a battle she knew she was going to win. I spent the day executing the party plans with flawless precision. The caterers arrived, and I directed them with a polite efficiency. The florist delivered arrangements of hydrangeas and roses, and I placed them strategically around the house. The cake, a 3-tiered masterpiece, was placed in the center of the dining table. My parents' home was transformed into a picture-perfect vision of pastel celebration. A beautiful stage for an ugly truth. My parents were thrilled, bustling around me. "Oh, Audrey, it's just perfect," my mother gushed, patting my arm. "You've really outdone yourself." "Anything for my sister," I said, my smile feeling like a mask I had glued to my face. Guests began to arrive, a sea of smiling women bearing brightly wrapped gifts. I played the part of the gracious co-host, taking coats, offering drinks, and making small talk. An elderly aunt pinched my cheek. "You're next, Audrey," she said cheerfully. "You and Trevor need to give your parents another grandchild." I just smiled and murmured something non-committal, the irony a bitter taste in my mouth. Then, Blair made her grand entrance with Graham. She was glowing, the undisputed queen of the day. She wore a beautiful, flowing white dress that accentuated her baby bump. She hugged me tightly. "Audrey, thank you," she whispered in my ear. "Everything is so beautiful. You're the best sister in the world." For a moment, her warmth felt so real, so genuine, that a tiny, treacherous part of me wanted to believe it all. But then I remembered the photos, the texts, and the coldness returned. Trevor arrived a few minutes later, playing the part of the supportive brother-in-law. He gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Looks great, Aud," he said, avoiding my eyes. He knew something was off between us, but he was too arrogant to imagine I knew the truth. The party moved along like a well-rehearsed play. Laughter filled the air. Games were played. Gifts were stacked high on a table. I moved through it all, an observer in my own trap. I watched my sister laugh, my husband chat with guests, my parents beam with pride. They were all actors, blissfully unaware that the final act was about to begin, and I was the director. Finally, my mother clapped her hands, her rings sparkling. "All right, everyone, it's time. Let's have Blair open her presents." A chorus of delight went through the room. Everyone gathered around the large, wingback chair we had decorated as Blair's throne. My heart began to beat a little faster, a slow, steady drum of anticipation. My mother caught my eye and gestured to the gift table. "Audrey, why don't you bring your special gift over first?" "I'd love to," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and steady. I walked to the table and picked up the large, ornately wrapped box. I had chosen the paper carefully, a shimmering, heavy gold stock, and tied it with a thick, cream-colored silk ribbon. It looked expensive. It looked important. It was. I carried it towards my sister, each step feeling deliberate and final. The calm before the storm was over. I held the box out to Blair. "This is for me," I announced, my voice carrying across the quieted room. "I wanted to give you something truly memorable. Something from the heart." Blair's face lit up with a genuine, childlike delight. "Oh, Audrey, you didn't have to go all out," she said, taking the heavy box and settling it in her lap. "But I'm so glad you did." She delicately worked at the silk ribbon, her painted nails a flash of pink against the cream color. The only sound in the room was the soft crinkle of the expensive wrapping paper and the expectant whispers of the guests. She finally got the paper off and lifted the lid of the box. Her smile faltered. A look of complete confusion washed over her face. "What is," she began, her voice trailing off. Nestled inside on a bed of pristine white tissue paper was not a cashmere baby blanket or an expensive stroller. It was a stack of professionally printed 8 by 10 photographs. The one on top was a crystal-clear image from the hotel room, of her and Trevor, tangled in the sheets, his arm possessively around her bare shoulders, both of them grinning smugly at the camera. The color drained from her face. It was instantaneous and absolute. One moment she was glowing, the next she looked like a marble statue. Her hands, holding the photo, began to tremble violently. She numbly shuffled to the next photo. And the next. Each one a new scene from their sordid affair. Graham, her husband, standing beside her chair, noticed the change immediately. "Blair? Honey, what's wrong?" He leaned over to look into the box. I watched his face cycle through the stages of destruction in a matter of seconds: confusion, dawning comprehension, disbelief, and finally, a deep, dark, volcanic rage. His face turned a blotchy red, and a vein pulsed in his forehead. The guests were murmuring now, sensing that something was terribly wrong. My parents started to move forward, their faces etched with a dawning horror. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't just for them. It was for everyone they had lied to. With a calm, deliberate movement, I walked to the large bay window that served as the backdrop to Blair's throne. Earlier, I had hung a heavy, cream-colored curtain over it, telling my mother it was to soften the afternoon light. Now, I grabbed the cord. I also had a little something made to decorate the room, I said, my voice ringing with an unnatural calm. And with one firm pull, I yanked the curtain down. Behind it, the large panes of glass had been transformed into a grotesque gallery. I had paid a premium to have the most damning photos and screenshots blown up into huge, poster-sized prints. There was Trevor kissing Blair's neck, his eyes closed in pleasure. There was a selfie of them in bed, champagne glasses in hand. And right in the center, the largest print of all, was the screenshot of my mother's text message, the words stark and unforgivable: "Audrey is strong. She'll be fine. What's important right now is you." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was followed by a wave of frantic, horrified whispers. Phones came out, not to take happy pictures, but to document the disaster. I picked up the microphone from the small table next to me, the one intended for announcing game winners. My voice, amplified, cut through the chaos like a knife. "I believe some congratulations are in order," I began, my tone as cold and clear as a winter morning. "Not just for the baby, but for my husband, Trevor, and my sister, Blair, on their passionate, long-running affair. And a very special thank you to my loving parents, for their unwavering support in helping them hide it from me. You all thought I was clueless. You thought I was a fool. You were wrong." Graham let out a strangled, animalistic roar. He didn't even look at Blair. He just turned and charged for the front door, screaming her name, calling her things I won't repeat here. The party imploded. Guests were scrambling to get away from the blast radius, their faces a mixture of pity and horrified fascination. I saw my father, his face a mask of purple rage, lunge toward me, but my uncle grabbed his arm and held him back. My mother just stood there, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with the shock of being exposed. My work was done. I set the microphone down gently. I picked up my purse. And without a single glance back at the wreckage, I walked through the stunned crowd, out the front door, and into the clean, quiet air of my new life. If you're still listening, please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've given me a like, and I understand that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please comment the number 1, and listen as I continue my story. I didn't stick around to witness the nuclear fallout. I had detonated the bomb, I didn't need to sift through the rubble. I got into my car, and as I pulled away from the curb, I saw panicked guests spilling out onto the front lawn, their faces a chaotic tableau of shock and gossip. For the first time in weeks, a genuine, unforced smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a prisoner who had just tunneled her way to freedom. The next few days were an island of absolute silence in a sea of chaos I knew was raging elsewhere. I turned off my phone, unplugged the landline, and ignored the doorbell. I ordered food in, watched old movies, and slept. I slept for 10 hours a night, a deep, dreamless sleep I hadn't had in years. It was the exhausted, peaceful sleep of a soldier after a long and brutal war. The silence was finally broken 4 days later when I decided to turn my phone back on. It was immediately flooded with dozens of missed calls and voicemails. I deleted them all without listening. But then, a call came through from a number I didn't recognize. On a whim, I answered it. "Hello? Audrey? It's Meredith." Her voice was hesitant, fragile. Meredith had been Blair's best friend since kindergarten. I braced myself for an attack, for a defense of her friend. "Meredith," I said, my voice flat. "If you're calling to yell at me, you can save your breath." "No!" "God, no," she said quickly. I'm calling to see if you're okay. And to say, I am so sorry. I was at the party. I saw everything. My God, Audrey." She sounded genuinely horrified. She told me she had fled the scene right after I did, grabbing her purse and practically running to her car. But her cousin, a notorious gossip, had stayed to watch the entire implosion and had given Meredith a detailed, blow-by-blow account. "You missed a Shakespearean tragedy, Audrey," she said, her voice a mix of awe and disgust. "After Graham stormed out, his parents lost their minds. His father, you know how big he is, he got right in Blair's face and just started screaming. He called her something that rhymes with more of Babylon. My father, ever the noble protector of his golden child's honor, apparently tried to play the hero. He started yelling, 'She's a pregnant woman. You can't talk to her like that.'" Meredith recounted. But Graham's dad just turned to him and said something like, "And you're the pathetic old man who raised a tramp." That's when your dad threw a punch. I let out a short, sharp laugh. I couldn't help it. "He did?" "He did. And he missed by a mile." Graham's dad just sidestepped it and then popped him one, right on the jaw. Your dad went down like a sack of potatoes. The mental image was so vivid, so karmically perfect, I almost felt a pang of regret for not staying to see it myself. "It gets worse," Meredith continued. "While the men were posturing, Graham's mom went after your mom. She was screaming about how your family had trapped her son, and your mom screamed back that her husband was a gorilla. Then Graham's mom just lunged and grabbed a huge handful of your mom's hair. People had to physically pull them apart. Your mom has a definite bald spot now." I listened, a silent observer to the destruction I had orchestrated. It was ugly and brutal, and they all deserved every second of it. Then Meredith's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Audrey," she said, her voice dropping. "Seeing what Blair was capable of, doing that to her own sister, it got me thinking. It made me look at my own life. My own husband. The collateral damage was just beginning." The conversation with Meredith was a strange sort of validation. It confirmed I had done the right thing by walking away and letting them tear each other apart. Now it was time to clean up my own life and make the separation permanent. My first act of liberation was a physical one. The morning after my phone call with Meredith, I woke up with a singular purpose. I went to the garage, found a stack of empty cardboard boxes and a roll of packing tape. Then, I began to systematically erase Trevor from my home. I started in the bedroom closet. I pulled out his suits, his shirts, his shoes, and threw them into boxes with a cold, detached efficiency. I didn't linger over the sweater I'd bought him for Christmas or the stupid t-shirt he wore on our first date. They were just objects, artifacts from a life that was no longer mine. I found one of Blair's designer hair ties on his nightstand, a small, silk thing. I held it for a moment, then dropped it into a box of his socks with a shudder of disgust. I cleared out the bathroom, the office, the garage. Every trace of him was packed away. It took me all day, but when I was done, I felt lighter. I dragged every last box, every garbage bag filled with his belongings, out to the curb and left them there in a heap of shame. My next call was to an attorney. I didn't want a mediator, I wanted a shark. I found the best, most expensive divorce lawyer in the city. I sat in his plush leather office chair and laid out the whole story, complete with a USB drive of my evidence. His eyes lit up. This wasn't just a divorce case, it was a slam dunk. The keywords we discussed were infidelity, dissipation of marital assets, and emotional distress. He assured me the divorce would be swift and heavily in my favor. I walked out of his office feeling powerful. That evening, I was sitting in my living room when I saw Trevor's car pull up. He got out and saw the mountain of his life piled on the curb. He just stood there for a long time, his shoulders slumped. I watched him from behind the curtains, feeling nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty distance. He didn't ring the doorbell. He didn't try to call. He just opened his trunk and began the humiliating task of loading his life into his car. It took him several trips. When the last box was loaded, he closed the trunk, got in the car, and drove away. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was absolute. It was a silence that spoke volumes. There were no angry voicemails, no apologetic letters, no attempts at a confrontation. It was as if I had been neatly and surgically removed from the family history. They had made their choice. They chose the lie. And in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift I could have ever asked for, the freedom of no longer having to try and earn their love. Just when I started to settle into my new, quiet life, the ripples from the explosion I had set off created a new wave, and it crashed right into the middle of the mess my sister had made. Meredith called me again, about a week after our first conversation. Her voice was raw with tears. He admitted it, Audrey, she sobbed. My husband. He and Blair. It wasn't just once. It's been going on for months. I listened as she poured out the story. Fueled by suspicion after the party, she had confronted her husband, and he had crumbled, confessing everything. In the heat of their argument, Meredith had screamed at him, "Was it fun? Sharing her with Trevor? Did you guys compare notes?" Her husband, in a fit of rage and guilt, did something I never would have predicted. He stormed out of their house, got in his car, and drove straight to my parents' home, where Blair was holed up with Trevor, both of them trying to build a new life on the ashes of mine. He pounded on the door. When Trevor answered, Meredith's husband didn't say a word. He just hauled off and punched Trevor directly in the face. The karmic justice was so perfect, so poetic, it was almost beautiful. The fallout was immediate. Trevor, the man who saw no issue with systematically cheating on his wife for months, was suddenly outraged at the idea that his mistress might have been unfaithful to him. The hypocrisy was stunning. He apparently had a screaming match with Blair, packed his bags that same day, and left her. He couldn't handle being betrayed. The man who shattered my world couldn't cope with having his own slightly scratched. So there Blair was. Pregnant, disgraced, and now utterly alone, abandoned by both of the married men she had been sleeping with. The intricate web of lies she had woven had become her own cage. My own life, in contrast, was becoming simpler by the day. My lawyer was a miracle worker. The evidence was so overwhelming that Trevor's side didn't even put up a fight. We began the process of selling the house, dividing the assets. The legal fees were mounting, but it was the price of freedom, and I was happy to pay it. While their lives were devolving into a chaotic mess of lawsuits and paternity questions, mine was becoming a clean, straightforward path forward. And at the center of their storm was the one, ticking time bomb that would determine everyone's future, the baby. The next few months were a masterclass in contrasts. While my former family was mired in legal battles and public shame, I was methodically untangling myself from the past. The house sold quickly. I took my half of the money, paid my lawyer's substantial salary, and used the rest to secure a small, bright apartment for myself. I packed my own boxes, but unlike Trevor's, mine were filled with the promise of a future, not the debris of a past. I spent my days focusing on the small, tangible acts of building a new life. I bought new furniture. I painted the walls a calm, peaceful shade of blue. I reconnected with old friends who I had drifted from, friends who were uncomplicatedly happy for my newfound freedom. Meanwhile, the storm around Blair continued to rage. Her divorce from Graham was a slow, agonizing process, held up by the legal questions surrounding the baby's paternity. Trevor was pressing charges against Meredith's ex-husband for assault. It was a tangled, ugly mess, and I was so profoundly grateful to be on the outside of it, looking in. Then, the baby was born. A boy. I heard the news through the grapevine, from a distant cousin who wasn't aware of the full extent of the drama. I felt a strange pang, not of jealousy or sadness, but of a detached pity for this innocent child, born into the heart of a hurricane. As was legally required, a paternity test was performed immediately. The results would be the final, definitive word in this sordid saga. Meredith called me the day she found out. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Well, the results are in," she said. I waited, holding my breath. "It's his," she said. "The baby is my ex-husband's." So it was confirmed. The baby was not Trevor's. The child that had been the catalyst for so much destruction, the reason my parents had given for hiding the affair, wasn't even his. The entire justification for my pain was built on yet another layer of deceit. When I hung up the phone, I didn't feel anger or even vindication. I just felt a deep, weary sense of closure. The last thread connecting me to their drama had been snipped. Trevor had destroyed his life for a child that wasn't his. Blair had blown up her marriage for a man who had now abandoned her. My parents had sacrificed their relationship with one daughter to protect the other's lie. It was a tragedy of their own making, and I was finally, completely, free of it. To start, let me just clarify something, because it seems a few people missed the sarcasm in my last update. When I said I was giving my family the benefit of the doubt, I was being sarcastic. No, I don't think they ever really cared. And even if this whole scandal hadn't happened, they wouldn't have bothered to reach out. Their silence for all these months has been the loudest, clearest message they've ever sent me. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place with a sad, predictable thud. Meredith's ex-husband, despite being the biological father, wanted nothing to do with Blair beyond the court-ordered child support payments. He was moving on, starting a new life. And who could blame him? So Blair, with a newborn baby and no one else to turn to, did the only thing she could do. She moved back home. The golden child, tarnished and broken, returned to her parents' house, the place where her reign had begun. I can only imagine the suffocating atmosphere in that house now, filled with resentment, shame, and the constant cries of a baby who serves as a living monument to all their mistakes. Her divorce from Graham was finalized. He was a free man, untethered from my family's toxicity. Meredith, too, finalized her divorce and is slowly rebuilding her life, just like me. As for me, life is quiet. And I have come to realize that quiet is not empty, it's peaceful. My apartment isn't large, but it's filled with sunlight and things that I chose, that make me happy. I've started taking a pottery class on weekends. There's something so satisfying about taking a shapeless lump of clay and turning it into something solid, and beautiful, and useful. It feels like a metaphor for my life. A few weeks ago, I met an old friend for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in years. I told her everything, the whole sordid story. When I was done, she didn't offer pity or platitudes. She just looked at me and said, "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." And for the first time, I realized I was proud of her, too. I spent so much of my life shrinking myself to fit into the shadow my sister cast. I thought their love was something I had to earn, a prize I had to win. I now know that true love, real respect, isn't something you have to fight for. It's something you deserve, just by being you. The betrayal that almost destroyed me ended up being the thing that saved me. It forced me to stop looking for my value in their eyes and to finally find it in my own. My story is one of pain, yes. But it is not a sad story. It's the story of a woman who was forged in fire and came out stronger. A woman who was erased and then wrote herself back into existence. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt invisible or have been hurt by the people who were supposed to love you most, please know that you are not alone, and you have an incredible strength inside you to build a new and beautiful life for yourself. Share your own stories of strength in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. You are so much more powerful than you know.